Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Parents Connect. Once again, I'm Rochelle Graham, licensed professional counselor and owner of Mindful Living Therapy and Counseling. So today, we had our another parent session, and it went well. People showed up, and I'm so excited because a lot of great things were shared, awesome testimonies, and just valuable information. Everybody that came just they were an integral part of the success of the parent session today. Again, it's so vital that we continue to create community when it comes to raising our children. So, and Parents Connect is a program that encourages community. It encourages sharing and praying for one another and helping each other thrive as parents. So when we show up and when the space is created and we create this safe space for everybody to share, great things happen. So to everybody that showed up today, thank you so much. You are so appreciated, and I can't wait to see you next weekend. Okay, so today, our topic for Parents Connect, it was parenting styles and grace. And today I have a presentation actually set up for you all out there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So today we are diving into parenting styles and grace. So we're going to explore how different styles show up, right, in homes and how grace can transform how we respond to our children and to ourselves. Okay. So this topic is anchored in scripture of Ephesians 4:2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. So that's just a reminder that humility and gentleness and patience are tools that we need when, especially with raising our children. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of, giving up and raising our children in weakness, but it's a reminder that we're raising our children with strength. That's what we need to do. And we need to be able to extend this same gentleness to ourselves as well. Not only being humble and gentle with other people and in our children, but being gentle and humble with ourselves. So, with that being said, breathe before responding, breathe before reacting, right? Get into the habit of taking your time and listening to our children, and being able to, you know, get them being able to listen to what's not said as well as what's said. Again, last week we talked about, not trying to fix everything, not trying to be the corrector all the time or having to be right. Sometimes our children just need to be listened to and they need to be handled gently and with humility. So, before we jump into the parenting styles, let's talk about grace. Grace in parenting, what that looks like, right? So, it doesn't mean that we avoid, you know, uh, righteous parenting or helping our children grow. It's a way we create space for growth, right? And it's a reminder that God meets us where we fall short, right? Grace is gentleness in action. And so, with that being said, we have to remember that grace is empathy over ego, compassion over criticism, and patience over punishment, right? We think about what love is. Love is kind, it's patient, it's gentle, right? So we really have to reflect and be reflective, have that reflective spirit so that we can rid ourselves of ego as parents, so that we can show empathy to our children, so that when our children are entering those spaces of uncertainty or anger or just in a dark space, we're able to hold their hands with compassion, just basic compassion, and sit with them through that because we're not going to be able to get rid of all the bad things that may happen to them. We may not be able to fix everything, but we can show compassion. We can decide and make a choice to make sure that we are patient, right? So it's just a reminder that grace in parenting, it just creates a safe space for growth. All right, so we did today go over parenting styles. And the four parenting styles that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of and have read about before, authoritarian, permissive, authoritative, and neglecting or uninvolved, uninterested, right? And so it's a spectrum of parenting styles. It ranges from controlling and demanding to complete freedom, and from cold and unresponsive to loving and receptive. Um, there's another parenting style that's not mentioned as much, and it's called over involved, actually. So we're going to kind of get into that as well. So, authoritarian, what does that mean? I believe that this parenting style is rooted in the classic because I said so, because I told you to, because I'm your parent and you have to listen to me, right? Um, Authoritarian parenting, those parents that pretty much have that parenting style, with them, it's you need to obey without questioning me, right? There should be no questions. There should be no, in fact, if you have an opinion, I'll give you your opinion if I ask for it. You know, those kind of parents. Strict discipline, such as corporal punishment, is pretty much one of these techniques that sometimes parents who are authoritarian use. It's really all about control. Um, and also thinking about intersectionality because it actually matters. When we think about culturally, Black parents and Black families, a lot of times it's not just about control with having this type of parenting style, it's also about protection, right? Love is expressed as I have to make sure you survive in a world that may seek to harm you, right? That classic idea of I need to get to you before the cops do. You need to understand how to navigate this world, so I'm going to be harder on you, right? And so this is something that, a lot of us have heard, especially in Black families. And this is rooted in generational, trauma, rooted in generational trauma from slavery, which post-traumatic slave syndrome does exist. And that's something that we've incorporated into some of our parenting styles because we are trying to make sure our children are protected or prepared actually for a world that can be very cruel because of the color of their skin. So this is why it's so important not to judge and not to be overly critical and to also show grace and compassion for ourselves as parents because the intention is to love, right? Even though sometimes we could do certain things better, we have to show compassion to ourselves because we live in a world that is rooted sometimes in racism and in classism and a whole lot of isms that our children may experience. And how do we prepare our children for that? It's hard to prepare our children for that if we don't know how to prepare them without having that authoritarian type of style. So this is just, that was just an example, but it's just something to keep in our back pocket as a perspective. So let's talk about the emotional impact of authoritarian parenting. What internalizing factors, what can that produce in our children, right? It can produce structure and resilience, right? Because authoritarian parents, they are structured. There is about obedience. Um, it's about doing things my way, that kind of parenting, but it can produce structure and resilience in children, but it can also create fear and emotional distance or difficulty with self-expression in adulthood. So that's just something to keep in mind when it comes to the emotional impact. Even though we have great intentions, good intentions, you know, we love our children. We want them to do well. We have to prepare them for this cold world, but it can create some deep internalizing wounds in our children, especially in adulthood, right? I've heard it said many times over that, I was beat or I was treated this way harshly, but I turned out fine, right? That's usually comes from people who, in fact, did not turn out fine. Um, and many times those same people are struggling with depression, anxiety, um, and are walking around with all those symptoms and haven't really, taken care or have sought help regarding those symptoms because to them it is normal, But thank goodness that times have changed and we're going forward and we're recognizing the stigmas of mental wellness and mental health. And we are saying, you know what? This may not be normal anymore. So, this is just an example of what can happen to children and people later in adulthood when they have been raised with primarily authoritarian parents. Permissive parenting is something we went over today. Permissive parenting, it's warm, loving, and nurturing, but very few boundaries or consequences, right? And this type of parenting style, um, we parents who have this main parenting style want to be their child's friend more than their guide, or they avoid confrontation to keep the peace. You think of maybe like passive communication, or sometimes passive aggressive. Feeling guilty about saying no is also one of the signs of permissive parenting. Overcompensating because of their own upbringing. Maybe their own upbringing was harsh and very authoritarian, and they're overcompensating because they don't want their child to dislike them, right? Or also giving in easily, right? So let's look at what the emotional impacts of permissive parenting are. Children may feel loved, but they struggle with boundaries, especially later on. There may be difficulty with authority or self-discipline. And then also, children may confuse love with leniency, right? Thinking that if I'm lenient with you, that means I love you, right? And that is totally not the case. But there is a difficulty with establishing boundaries with people who have been raised in a very permissive household. And the lack of boundaries may look different. It could show up in relationships later. It can show up at work. They may struggle to um, set boundaries when it comes to their own discipline, having self-discipline with cleanliness or, with relationships or difficulty with authority, authority figures, being told direction or, what to do later on by bosses, by teachers, by, people in authority positions. So those are the emotional impacts that can happen when being raised in a permissive household. So authoritative parenting, right? This type of parenting style incorporates high expectations with high warmth, firm and nurturing, right? This is the type of parenting where I think we all want to get to every day, for the most part. And with saying that, by saying that, a lot of times with the different parenting styles, sometimes we alternate with these different parenting styles within a week. Sometimes you may be permissive and then you may be authoritarian and then maybe you're authoritative, in that same week. This is why it's so important to have compassion and grace with yourself first, because we're not going to always be authoritative every single day, but it's really good to identify what's going on and how we're parenting, right? So, authoritative parenting, there are consistent boundaries, but that parent is leading with love. There's discipline, but there's also explanation, right? And then also parents in this parenting style, they teach accountability while modeling grace, right? And so consistent boundaries feel safe to children. Even though children would love to always be told yes, it feels safe and very consistent when there are boundaries, when there are rules. You could take, a baby and just see that when they're playing in their crib, there are certain things that they can play with, and the things that they can't play with, they're left outside of the crib, right? So children, even though outside of the crib, they may go for this shiny, sharp thing, but it's not there because it's the rule that they can't have it. So boundaries are actually safe, especially when they're consistent. And children appreciate that. They may not say it, but they really do. And so the emotional impact when it comes to authoritative parenting. Children feel safe to express their opinions and emotions. They develop self-regulation and self-worth. They feel loved, they feel heard, and they feel secure, which is where we would love our children to get to. They're not in that parenting feeling of controlled. They're not feeling controlled. They're not feeling like they're not able to accomplish things or have opinions. They're able to have opinions and emotions and be human. If you think of the summation of what authoritative parenting is, that child feels the safeness of being human. They feel safe in expressing themselves. And that's so important that we allow that, especially for our Black children, especially for them, because we have been told to not express ourselves. We have been told not only by society, but then also as a result of societal expectations. We've been told by our own parents, and or it has been implied by our own parents and people in our communities that it's not safe to speak up, that it's not safe to express, that it's not safe to have opinions, it's not safe to challenge. But I'm here to tell you that type of implication that needs to stop, and we need to get to a point where we create that space where it's safe for our children to challenge intellectually, but in a respectful way. And the uninvolved parents or the uninvolved parenting style, there are low expectations, low responsiveness. So there's little emotional connection. There's minimal guidance, minimal feedback or structure. These type of children, that are involved, that are being parented in this way with this style, children make decisions on their own way too early, and parents are often focused on survival and work or sometimes unresolved pain. If you can, imagine a parent who is struggling with depression, they are struggling with alcoholism, or they're just struggling with financial issues, which is why another reason why we shouldn't judge, why this is not criticism, this is just identifying. A lot of times, parents are uninvolved, not because they want to be uninvolved, but because there's a lack of community, there's a lack of a village, and that parent is overwhelmed. They are tired, and they don't know not only how they're going to eat, but how their children are going to eat, right? And so they're in survival mode, and they're just so uninvolved, but they don't mean to be. The intention is not to be uninvolved, but their bodies and minds are overworked and overwhelmed. So, what does that emotional impact look like? Children feel unseen. They're struggling with self-worth. They seek validation through peers or performance. And the children who have uninvolved parents, they become independent but emotionally guarded. So that's just something to keep into perspective when it comes to this type of parenting style. And again, a lot of times with this spectrum of parenting styles, we alternate. A lot of us alternate between all of these, sometimes within a week and sometimes within a day. So it's so important to show grace and mercy and compassion for yourself. Again, let's identify these parenting styles. Let's understand the emotional impact. so we can figure out how to solve the issue and focus on love and grace for ourselves and our children so that we can be able to solve the emotional impact that has happened as a result of uninvolvement or authoritarian parenting or even strengthen authoritative. So here's the fifth one, the over-involved parent, the over-involved parenting style. The helicopter parent, right? I think we've all heard of that. So with this type of parenting style, there is constant monitoring and demanding perfection. I would also like to include that culturally in Black households, this can trace back to survival and systemic pressure. The idea that if you do everything right, maybe the world will treat you right, right? I think a lot of us have heard the phrase, as Black people, we got to be 10 steps ahead. There is no room for mistakes, right? Um, and sometimes that unintentionally translates to you're only lovable when you perform, right? So even though right intention, the love is there, but how can we make this different? How can we strengthen this? Even though we know we live in a world that sees us in a certain light, right? How can we still maintain emotional health? How can we still maintain that and still be cognizant of what's going on in the world? The idea that there's no room for mistakes can create some deep emotional wounds for our children, especially our Black boys and Black young ladies, and just our Black children, because they already have we have issues in our systemically within our education systems, our health systems, all the systems. But within our education system, there may be some high anxiety, especially our Black children who go to predominantly white schools, things of that nature. But for all children, the idea that you are only lovable when you perform, that is a deep wound that presents. And the emotional impact that has is struggling with anxiety, fear of failure, children who've had this type of over involvement, they may hide mistakes instead of learning from them, right? And this goes all the way into adulthood. How we're parented, it becomes a lot of the emotional impact transcends into our adulthood. It just goes right in there. And a lot of times we don't know where the anxiety and the depression are coming from. But if we look at sometimes the parenting style, we can really identify like, oh, this was something that was a wound for me. So it's really good to understand that. So, what are some uh, parenting skills, right? Some parenting skills that we can hold on to, that we can have in our back pocket, so that we can just parent differently, right? In our session today, it was said that it's not about parenting better than what our parents did because we're raising different children, different than who we are, right? And again, no judgment. We're just doing it differently, right? In this day and age, let's do it differently. So parenting skills that may help get to that point of having different parenting style is active listening. We said last week, or I mentioned that reflective listening really, really helps. Avoiding interrupting or correcting mid-story. Again, keep rules clear and consistent. Not making empty threats, follow through gently, and not making threats at all, but having a set of rules and fair boundaries, and obvious consequences when those boundaries, when children do need consequences, but the consequences should definitely match the situation. And again, I'm totally against corporal punishment. I think a lot of people know that. But there are other ways to create discipline in your home, positive discipline. Identifying emotions, helping your children with the language of emotions. I see that you're feeling frustrated, especially for our little littles. I see that you're feeling sad or melancholy, giving them the language so that they can themselves identify. And also modeling emotional regulation. If, as a parent, mother or father, you are, screaming and yelling, and we're human too, and it happens. But if you're doing that, what does that model for your child? Right? Again, breathe, take a minute and come back, right? A lot of times we don't model emotional regulation, but that's something that we need to be able to do in order for our children to self-regulate. We have to be careful with our words. We don't want to kill our children's spirits. I said today in the session that, our children, their frontal lobes aren't fully developed yet. We cannot expect them to be perfect. We cannot expect them to get it right the first, second, third time sometimes. And I know a lot of us parents like, I told them 10 times, I told them 14 times. Some of our children are battling depression. Some of our children are struggling with anxiety. And when your brain is not fully developed and you're already struggling in that area, what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be moments that that child may forget what you said a minute ago. That child may forget to do their chores. Homework is not on that child's brain when trauma or abandonment or rejection or bullying or societal pressure have entered the brain, right? So we have to not only understand that, but we need to create a safe space in our home, a safe atmosphere in our home, so that our babies' brains are relaxed enough to emotionally regulate. And so, in order to do that, you, as the parent and the guardian in their safe space, you need to be able to emotionally regulate. Right? So, criticism, name calling, anything that spiritually depletes our children, stop. We need to validate feelings. Our children's feelings are very valid. They may not go to work or pay bills like we do, but they get tired. They get emotional. There's things that are bothering them. We need to validate that. We want, again, use natural and logical consequences. We want to praise progress and not perfection. It's great when our children do great things, but it's also great when they don't get it great because that's called progress. I always say to my children, and I had to get to this point. I didn't just wake up this mother that knew all this stuff. I've made tons of mistakes, but I got to the point where I've been able to instill in my children that making mistakes, it's amazing because now I know that you're actually trying, right? And even having the conversation of what did you fail today? Getting used to failure because that is going to lead you to a place of progression. Because I know you're trying. I know you're actually doing it. I know you're doing the thing that is hard to do, right? Focusing on learning and not fear. Again, we don't want to instill fear into our children. We want to instill care and grace. And they're learning. This is their first time here. It's our first time here, right? But we've been here longer. And when you think of it, we've been here longer and we're still making mistakes. And we wouldn't want anybody coming to us instilling fear. We don't want to do that to our children, especially our children who haven't been here as long as we have. Obviously, I spelled apologize wrong, but that's okay. Apologize. You know, what I love about this new generation of kids and young adults is that they are not afraid to call us out on our stuff. But I love that because we need to, as the older people, the parents, the grandparents, we need to be able to say, I'm sorry because that wasn't right. Right? I'm sorry because you didn't deserve that. Let me fix this. How do we fix the rupture in a relationship? Apologizing, but not only apologizing, but meaningful apology, authentic apology, not an apology with a preposition with but at the end. No, an apology that's authentic, that says, I'm sorry, let me fix this because you didn't deserve it. Um, and also, as caregivers, let's share our own mistakes because we're not perfect. Let's share about our own mistakes. I talk to my children about the day I've had and the mistakes I've made because I'm human and I want them to see me as such. Not only as their mother and I want them to respect me, but I also want them to know that I also make mistakes on a daily basis. And when you do that, you invite your child into problem solving. And trust me, children, they are amazing. They may have some solutions for you. You know, my one of my daughters, when I was having trouble with a client a long time ago, she offered a suggestion about like creating a coloring book around a certain topic. Um, and it was an amazing suggestion. And she was only 6 or 7 at the time. Listen to your children. Help them feel safe connecting with you. And then also self-care. As parents and caregivers, let's model self-care so that our children know how to take care of themselves too. All right. So, grace, back at grace again. And I love this word, obviously, you could tell. The scripture that reminds me of grace is 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And that's just a reminder of God's covering, of his protection. That we don't need to really look any further. God, when we center him in our parenting, when we center him in our lives, we are able to help build the kingdom and help our children in that way too. We're able to just center our lives or center God in our lives, and our children see that and we model that, and our children are able to center God as well. You know, we have to model all this first. We have to have the behavior. We have to model the behavior that we want to see in our children, right? And we know that God shows up for us when we fall short. So we need to show up for our children when they fall short in the same way. Um, so what does grace look like in each parenting style? Authoritarian. Grace actually softens control for the parent that has that type of parenting style. Ask God for it, right? Pray for it. Ask God to soften you a little bit so that you can show that you don't always have to be in control. You don't always have to fix everything. Sometimes your presence over perfection is needed. Authoritative. For that parenting style, grace deepens connection, right? Even though that's the parenting style that I think we all want, where it's consistent boundaries, there's always room for growth. Ask God to deepen your connection. Where is your blind spot as a parent? Ask God to show it to you. You know, it reminds me of just all of a sudden thinking about asking God for these things. It reminds me of Solomon in the Bible. He didn't ask God for riches or a long life or wealth. He asked God for wisdom and discernment and humility. And not only did God give him that, he gave him that plus more. So when you center Christ, you're able to get much more, you know, than what you ask for, especially in your role as a parent. Okay, so in the uninvolved parenting style, grace restores presence. Ask God for that. Grace restores presence. Grace restores you not only just being there physically, but it helps to give you that ability to be present, to be mindful. And it takes one step at a time. For the permissive parenting style, grace strengthens boundaries, right? Grace brings that assertiveness and it strengthens you. Find out where you need grace as a permissive parent or in that parenting style. Find out what's one thing you can do every day, just one thing where God can strengthen your boundaries. Maybe even with other people, not just your children, not just who you're taking care of, so that you can practice building boundaries. And the over-involved parent. A lot of times that's a lot of control issues in that parenting style. Grace teaches trust. The scripture that comes up for me is, you know, trusting the Lord with all thine heart and not leaning just on my understanding. But when you trust God with all your heart, you don't have to control everything. You don't have to fix everything, right? You don't have to be anxious. Philippians 4:6 said, We, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, pray, right? Ask God for what you need. You don't have to worry because with God's help and you centering Christ, God is going to provide. He's going to cover. Yeah, he's going to provide his provision, right? So all of these parenting styles, again, it's not about perfection, it's about presence. I am going to attach a actual like a worksheet that helps you determine what your parenting style is so that you can kind of see where you are. And it's not to, again, judge or say you're right or wrong. This is strictly for identifying, maybe there's a blind spot or identifying where you are. And if you're, and to be more reflective. And if you're comfortable with that parenting style and knowing the emotional impact, what can you do better? Regarding that parenting style. Okay. And I think that is the last slide. I probably kept you long enough. I will stop sharing. Okay. Thank you so much. Anybody who's listening to this on a Saturday or a Sunday, or any day, because I'll probably repost. But I truly appreciate the people that have been of support of Parents Connect and of mindful living therapy and counseling and of my journey as a therapist. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. And just continue to support, continue to look for some more videos. I'm enjoying this time with you guys, and I'm enjoying the time doing the group sessions with other parents. I'm learning so much, and it's stretching me and pruning me in places that I've never thought. I am just very appreciative of the love and support. So without further ado, thank you, and just look out for some things that I'll attach to my YouTube video, some of the documents or worksheets that can be completed that you can use for reflection and maybe some journal prompts. But again, thank you and love you. Have a great week and see you next week. Bye bye.